Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World Government Summit COVID-19 and Government webinar series. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce us to our session today, titled COVID-19, How Can We Harness Technology to Overcome Pandemics? Today, our esteemed panelists are Dr. Peter Diamandis, Executive Chairman of XPRIZE Foundation, and Sagar bin Ghalib, Director of the Artificial Intelligence Office for the United Arab Emirates. I take great pleasure in welcoming both. Sagar, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Reem. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be with you today and to be having this discussion on harnessing technologies to overcome pandemics with Peter Diamandis. Peter is the founder and executive chairman of the XPRIZE Foundation, a world leader in designing and operating large-scale intensive competitions, the executive founder of Singularity University that offers education in futurology and counsels the world's leaders on exponentially growing technology. Peter is also the author of numerous New York Times bestseller, one of which is my personal favorite, Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for joining us.
It's our pleasure. Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure to be back in the UAE, albeit digitally, and this is the shape of things right now. And excited to have this conversation, and looking forward to the conversation with you, Sagar, and then the questions from everybody listening. So please do ask those questions that are burning in your mind. Let me frame, if I could, the way I'm thinking about this, and then let's get into the dialogue, our fireside chat. So we are truly living during an unusual and a most extraordinary time. There's never been a time like this before. And the way that I think about what has been going on and what is going on and what will go on is really, I hearken back to life on the planet Earth 65 million years ago when a large asteroid hit the planet. And when this asteroid hit the planet 65 million years ago, the environment changed so rapidly that it caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and those furry mammals that were able to adapt rapidly to the changing environment evolved and dominated the planet and became us, you and I. And the asteroid that has struck the planet over the last decade really has been exponential technologies, computation, sensors, networks, AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology, augmented virtual reality. These technologies are changing the pace of every industry, how we live our lives, how we raise our kids, how we govern our nations. And it's causing a lot of transformation. Some may call it disruption. Over the last now 4 months, we've had another asteroid strike the planet, and that is COVID-19, which has caused such a rapid change that it really has transformed so many parts of our lives. And we'll talk about this. It's transformed everything from retail and restaurants to air travel to hotels to healthcare to education. And I had the pleasure of writing a book that came out in January. It's a book called The Future is Faster Than You Think. And it was the third in my series, Abundance and Bold. And it looks at where every industry is going in the next 10 years. And the realization is that COVID-19 has accelerated by anywhere from 2 to 4 years a lot of this exponential change. And you know, one of the things I'm so proud of the UAE is the way the UAE has embraced the concept of AI, given the leadership that you are providing and your colleagues. The next asteroid that's going to strike the planet is going to be AI, meaning when I think about this, the next significant disruptive change, which will make lives amazingly automatic and magical, but it will be transformational, and people, I'm not sure, are really ready for how much change will be coming when the world around you is in so much is becoming intelligent. But we'll talk about that. So I'll kick it off and then kick it to you on a subject that I am hopeful around COVID-19. I'm involved in a number of companies that are developing diagnostics and vaccines and therapeutics. And I'm tracking very deeply the healthcare industry. And given my work at XPRIZE and my work at in Singularity University, I'm tracking the education industry well. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, coming back to your point about asteroids, the current asteroids we're living in, I mean, is a common enemy, this COVID-19. We are all facing it. Many governments of the world trying to fight it. What are your thoughts on how governments can leverage technology and collaborate maybe together in a better way to fight?
Yeah, so thank you, Sekar. I think that a point that's important to make is that the human race has never had what I call a single enemy, a singular enemy like this before. There's always been division and different problems in different parts of the world, but for the first time ever, every nation on the planet is realizing this particular virus is of concern. And so what's happened is we've seen somewhere in my estimate, between 100 million and 200 million physicians and scientists and nurses and technologists and engineers all focusing in on how do we solve this problem. And it's never been that level of a convergent focus. And I think that that first of all, collaboration is key, right? We all are humans with the same roughly 3.2 billion letters and the same immune systems and the same health, health biology. And so finding cures anywhere on the planet helps everywhere on the planet. And so collaboration is fundamentally one of the most important things we can be doing. And I'm seeing this in the work that I'm doing. One of my companies, a company called Kovacs, that has built a very super high sensitivity and specificity blood antibody test, and also developed 30 different vaccines. We're taking 2 of them forward into humans. We're doing testing in China and Taiwan at the same time in the United States. And so it very much is a collaborative conversation. So that level of collaboration and really opening up the doors of scientists speaking to scientists is one of the most important things that can be done. We're also, frankly, all facing the same issues. Our children are home, being educated, from a computer or books at home, and parents are having to deal with how do you challenge, being in your office, which is in your bedroom or living room or office at home, and dealing all of these things. All are common challenges. And so really a lot of entrepreneurs are stepping up to reinvent how we do these things. And I think one of the most important things that governments can be doing here is really embracing change. So one of the challenges is that we humans all around the world don't like change. We like waking up in the morning, for the most part, and believing that the world is the same as it was from the night we went to sleep. And when there is a dramatic change, we have these cognitive biases, and we have something called loss aversion, that whatever we knew is being lost in some way. And so how do we deal with rapid change? It really requires agility and adaptability. And so the governments and the companies and the families and the individuals who are most open to change can say, okay, I got it. That was the way it was. We have to adapt now. Are the ones that are going to survive and thrive the most during this time. So it really is creating a culture of a positive mindset, a culture of adaptability. Yes, there are many problems, but we are more positioned as scientists and engineers than ever before to solve problems. And as we solve problems, we create new industries, we create new capabilities, and we move humanity forward. So let me pause there.
Thank you. You mentioned about companies and entrepreneurs. Zoom had 10 million users in December of 2019. It has 300 million users as of April 2020. So unprecedented rate of growth. Do you see any other technologies that are on the horizon that are similar to what we're seeing with Zoom?
Yeah, so it's true, and it's transforming how we travel to each other, right? So the challenge has been, as Zoom has skyrocketed, and it's one of many platforms. It is for sure, we've gone from everybody making phone calls, and conference calls, to just being on Zoom. And I was on a Zoom with somebody. I said, why can't we just get on the phone? It's can we have a little bit of a change of coming on the phone? It's we humans are curious in that regard. And there's a chart that many people have seen that that Zoom is now worth more than the top 8 airlines on the planet. And I'm not, normally I would hop on Emirates and fly from LA to Dubai or Abu Dhabi. It's one of my favorite flights. I can enjoy and relax. And here I'm doing it for free on Zoom, and beaming into hopefully the hearts and minds of a lot of leaders in the Emirates. So that kind of change, I talk about this, that the exponential technologies, that whatever we digitize, we dematerialize, we demonetize, and we democratize, right? These are the D's of exponential. So in this case, we've digitized this instantaneous travel. We've dematerialized me getting on an airplane and coming there, and it's demonetized, meaning it's free, and it's democratized the ability for more and more people to log in and see this conversation. And so we're seeing that a lot, and that's going to be in almost every industry. We're going to see this digitization and dematerialization in education, in healthcare, in retail, in food, and such. And we're going to see all of the exponential technologies transform. So you've asked what else we're going to see. I think in the background mode today, Saikar, as you know, we have 5G growing globally, right? We see Huawei and Qualcomm and a multitude of providers providing technologies. On top of that, we're going to see an explosion. I guess that's not the right term I should use. We're going to see a massive increase in the number of satellites launched. You don't want to mix satellites launching and explosions. That doesn't work well in the space business. But Starlink is launching another 60 satellites, I think, today. This is SpaceX's multi 10,000 satellite constellation that will provide 100 megabit and multi-gigabit global coverage. But it's not just SpaceX, it's a multitude of companies out there in the world working on this. But we're going to head towards a world where every square meter of the planet's surface is being bathed in multi-100 megabit and gigabit connection speeds. We're going from half the world connected last year, about 3.84 billion people, to 8 billion people, everybody on the planet being connected by these devices in the next 4 to 5 years, which means we have 4 billion new minds coming online, 4 billion people who have never bought anything, uploaded, downloaded anything, who now have access to the world's information on Google or Baidu, who have access to computational power on the cloud, 3D printing on the cloud. We're going to see autonomous cars, flying cars, entering. We'll see drones, both skyborne drones and ground-based drone delivery services for your lunch or dinner or your Amazon here in the States delivery. We'll see a significant investment in virtual and augmented reality. So my kids play with their Oculus Quest headsets. They love them, but they're still rather low resolution, 1K per eye. We'll be seeing the next generation of Oculus and also HTC headsets that will double the resolution, and we'll start to be able to read text inside those VR headsets. So, in the not too distant future, the next year or two, the World Government Summit will be in VR, and I'll be walking through the streets and visiting and meeting my friends and saying hello virtually in that regard. And then, of course, the biggest impact, and it's the title you hold that I love, is going to be in the field of AI, where AI is going to become embedded in everything. AI will become the world's best diagnosticians and physicians, the world's best teachers, the world's best tour guides, the world's best, informational friend. AI is going to. I'm investing in AI and tracking in AI and starting companies in the field and seeing this massive rise of capability that is moving faster than most people even realize. And it's both exciting, and in some ways it's I don't know what I don't know, and that becomes interesting.
What are your thoughts on any of these technologies needing government endorsements to develop, or would such endorsements or involvement actually hinder progress?
It's a great question. I mean, and it's both. Let's slow this down a little bit. There are things like autonomous cars and flying drones where the public depends on the government for their safety, where the general public isn't going to feel like they know enough to know that this autonomous car driving down the street or this drone delivering a package in the air is sufficiently safe. Should they worry about it or shouldn't they worry about it? They depend on the government to have done sufficient checks to say, yes, we have deemed this to be a safe capability. Companies will do their best because it's such a detriment for them to do something that isn't safe. But yet, I think it's the combination of government and companies collaborating for checks and balances that's important. So it's important there. In the healthcare system, we have a similar situation, but there's a difficult challenge and it may not be in the Emirates, it may be in other governments around the world, where there's a difficulty where if a government approves a technology and then people lose lives because the technology wasn't safe, then there's such a downside to approving a new technology that it's easier not to approve it. In other words, you get marks against you if you approve something that turns out to be unsafe, versus the flip side of the equation is if you're losing lives in a particular area, how do we take the risks? And so it's measuring the loss of life from something not approved to the loss of life for something that is approved. And how do we balance this? How do we create agility? So one of the areas that I've thought about in healthcare is how do we allow people to take personal responsibility to say, I know this is a risky procedure or a risky technique, whether it's CRISPR or gene therapy, but hey, I want to take the risk because there's nothing else there for me. And so I think we have to create new methodologies that allow the individual to take the risk for themselves in the healthcare arena, where I call this sort of the accredited patient. So in the investment world, if we take a company public, it's got enough lawyers looked at it, enough individuals looked at it to say, okay, this is a safe investment for widows and orphans, whatever. But there's something called an accredited investor program that at least in the United States, and the Securities and Exchange Commission regulations that say if you have a net worth of $1 million or more, make $250,000, you're smart enough to make a decision to invest in risky investments. And that's called a Regulation D offering. I don't want to go into that. I think there should be the equivalent in the healthcare industry where, yes, it's not, again, using the US equivalent, it's not FDA approved, but if you've done the research and your husband or wife or doctor and you sign the waivers, you should be able to take this risky procedure if there's no other treatment for you. So creating more of an agile regulatory environment for allowing research to occur, I think is an important part of the equation. Allowing doctors from anywhere on the planet to become available to support people if they need it at lower costs. Today, there's a lot of regulations that might prevent cross-border medical diagnostics. Education, I think, is another area that's going to be, the question is, do governments regulate educational programs or not? I think it's a matter of balancing both safety and balancing agility, because one of the things, Sakhar, I talk about is that the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea, right? If the day before something happened, it was an incremental improvement, then that's not really a breakthrough. But if it really is a true breakthrough, then we're going from computing on vacuum tubes to computing in silicon, and people go, that will never work. So where inside our countries and inside of our organizations do we allow crazy ideas to be tried and tested? And if you don't allow crazy ideas to be attempted and tried and tested, then you're limiting yourself to incremental improvement and not true breakthrough improvement. So that's the balancing act governments have to be thinking about.
Interesting. You mentioned healthcare a couple of times, and obviously it's a big topic with COVID, but I've heard you say multiple times that technology will significantly increase people's lifespans, that 100 will be the new 60.
Yeah.
So a lot of what you're doing, your work on research on singularity, COVID-19 testing, vaccinations, where do you think we're heading, and how far are we from achieving this?
Yeah, so it's I'm in my 50s, and a lot of my friends in their 50s and 60s and 70s are like, Peter, hurry up. So yeah, no, it's something which I believe that we do have the ability to significantly extend the human health span. And so why do I believe that? First of all, there are a multitude of species on the planet that are living to 200, 300, 400, 500 years. The bowhead whale, the Greenland shark, sea turtles, and so forth. And I remember when I was in medical school years ago, and I saw a show on these long-lived sea life. I said, why can they and why don't we? And I said, it's either a hardware problem or a software problem, and we're going to be able to solve that eventually. And so all of us know of stories of people who live to 100, 120, they still smoke, they still drink. What is it? Why are they doing that? It has to do with our biology. It has to do with where, our genetics, has to do with the food we eat, the environment we have. And we finally have enough understanding of our biology, of our 3.2 billion letters of our genome, of the different elements that cause aging, to start to impact that. I'm writing a book right now with Tony Robbins, who is someone I know has been to the World Government Summit many times, working on a book called Life Force that will come out in about 18 months or so, where we're looking at all the top techniques and technologies that are impacting human vitality and lifespan. These are things like stem cells and exosomes, Wnt pathway, which is cell-to-cell communications, gene therapies, CRISPR technologies, a multitude of these, and that are in the lab right now in human testing in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. that I believe are transformative. I truly think that we're going to be able to make 100 years old and you 60, where you have the aesthetics, you look good, the cognition, you're thinking clearly, the mobility, you feel energized, and you're moving around well at 100 that you had at 60, and that's the goal. It's not to be in a wheelchair and decrepit. It's really having that ability. And the beautiful thing is that technology is not standing still during this time. If we are able to extend those extra 10, 20, 30 healthy years onto your life, during those extra healthy years of life, we're seeing this exponential growth of technology, which gives you breakthroughs that give you additional years. There's a concept that my dear friend, mentor, co-founder of Singularity University, Ray Kurzweil, talks about, called longevity escape velocity. That there's a moment in time that for every year that you're alive, science is extending your life for more than a year. And so there will be a point at which hopefully it's available to us, but most definitely available to our children, that they will be able to live as long as they desire. That's a strange thought. And it's something that governments do have to think about from a perspective of public health and social issues in the United States, Social Security, and so forth. So I think about this a lot. I think there's no bigger business. I'll give you an example. This coming August and again in September, I'm taking my Abundance. I run a event for top level CEOs around the world in January called Abundance 360. It's 360 CEOs. We look at what's happened in the last 12 months and what's coming in the next 2 to 3 years they need to focus on. And I take a group of them every year on a platinum trip. In the last 3 years, we've gone to China to meet with the CEOs of Huawei and Baidu and Tencent and so forth. This year, we're focusing on longevity and immunity. So we're going for 5 days to go and visit the top companies in San Diego and San Francisco that are focused on all of these technologies. And I think of it as the best place people to invest their time and their money to understand how, because there's nothing more valuable than your health, right? The person who has their health has 1,000 dreams. The person who does not has their health has one dream. And so I think we're going to make a lot of impact, but it's going to impact every company and every country. And while the wealthier will get access to these technologies in the beginning, all the technologies I'm tracking are pretty cheap to implement. So they'll be available for everybody. The good news is that the global population has been slowing down, right? 50 years ago, we had, I think it was 5.6 children per family. Today, it's around 2.4. So as I think the population will continue to grow, but I think we'll peak at 9.5 billion and rapidly decrease after that. So it is an area I'm passionate about. I've started many companies in this area. Yeah.
All right. Peter, we have a question from Her Excellency Noor Al-Kaabi, the UAE Minister of State of Culture and Knowledge Development. She's asking, how does Dr. Peter foresee education in the future?
Yeah, so I have 2 boys that are 9 years old. They just turned 9, so I'm very much focused on their education. And let me differentiate education into sort of elementary school, the first 10 years of our educational life, and then university and post-university. So those 3 segments. The challenge is that we're still educating our children the same way we have for the last 100 years. It's the single, smart, wise adult in the classroom and the kids together. And that's fine, but it's very limited. And I think we need to start to change what we teach our children and how we teach our children. So I think we used to teach our children really to get them ready for industry, for life. It was more like they were on a conveyor belt. The bell would ring and they would move from one station to the next station, from math to science to social studies to whatever it might be. And we'd focus them on learning facts, where today a fact is you can ask, your AI and have that fact instantly. So I think about, it's much more important to teach our children how to ask great questions than what they know. For me, the three things I focus on for my kids are: number one, help them find their passion. Not my passion, not their teacher's passion. What is their passion? Mark Twain said, there are two important days in your life: the day that you're born and the day that you find out why. And so helping a child find their passion in life is the most important thing. I grew up passionate about space. It was the Apollo program and Star Trek that lit me up, and everything I've done has come out of that passion. And so my most important thing for my kids is help them find their passion. The second most important thing is help them ask great questions. And I play this game with them. It's like, who's got the best question? And we focus on that, right? I think it's also true for government leaders and CEOs and entrepreneurs. It's the quality of the questions you ask, far more important than anything else. The third thing for them is teaching them what's been called grit, not giving up. How do you keep going even when you fall? How do you pick yourself up and try again? Again, a lot of my companies and endeavors have been overnight successes after 11 years of hard work, right? We all know that in our lives, the things we care about most. And then the technologies we use for education. I imagine a near-term future. I'm Greek of origin. My parents were both born in a small island in Greece. And if my children want to learn about, Socrates or Plato, instead about reading about it in a book, there will be a point where they will put on their VR goggles. The VR goggles in the next couple of generations will have a resolution that looks so real, right? We're almost there in terms of the Unity engines, and it's extraordinary what I've seen. But you'll put on your VR goggles and you'll be in ancient Greece. You'll look around, there's a guy sitting on a piece of white marble over there in a toga. You go over and say hello, introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm Peter. He says, hi, I'm Plato. And that avatar, that digital avatar of Plato, is driven by an AI neural net model, that everything that's ever been known or written about Plato is instantiated in that model. And so I can have a conversation with Plato and walk around and see what did you have for breakfast? Who are your friends? What do you think about? Where do you live? And actually learn from an experience that is a billion times better than reading a book, right? So I think that's one of the futures. And then that's VR. Augmented reality will turn our everyday moments into educational experiences. I see something fall off a shelf and I can see sort of the equations of motion of 1/2 mv squared or mgh or whatever the case might be, and see that literally in front of me, and everything becomes a learning experience. University, I think, is going to change dramatically as well. I've gone to some of the best universities in the world. I'm very proud of that. But the idea that we go to school for 4 years from age 18 to 22 and then we're done, I think is a thing of the past. I think that ultimately education is a continuous process, that maybe it's a subscription, that if I get accepted to MIT, I have an educational subscription for life, that I'm continuously being educated. It's not one and done, because it needs to be, the rate of change is so continuous, that I have my own version. My favorite analogy is Jarvis from Iron Man, one cigar that I know you know well. And we'll have this AI shell, this AI software shell that is educating us all the time, everywhere, and helping us do not only the things we can do, but the things that we aspire to do, that we find joy in.
Okay, great. We have a question from the UAE Space Agency. I know you like space, quite close to your heart. So they're asking, Peter, you helped ignite commercial space through the XPRIZE. Do you feel the current situation presents an opportunity to double down on space investments to take advantage of lower costs and the need for hope and inspiration?
Yeah, so that's a beautiful question. And hello to my friends in the UAE space program. I'm rooting for you and everything that you're doing. And I love the vision. Yeah, I think that we're entering a new era in space. The first era was one of coming out of a military industrial complex and using ICBMs to send people and things into orbit. We now have a new generation of launch vehicles that are really derived and designed from all of these exponential technologies. We talk about 3D printing of rocket engines and AI full up physics simulations, so that by the time we launch a vehicle, we know it's going to work, which is extraordinary, right? When before the first Dragon resupply missions went to the space station, the first missions worked perfectly, yay, because they were testing along the way, but also because there was full physics models that tested all of the software, and that before you ever launched a single atom into orbit, digitally, it was fully modeled, and we knew everything worked beautifully. So that's extraordinary. And we're seeing incredible cost performance. Let me give some numbers. The space shuttle was about $1 billion per launch in a good year. It was a $4 billion budget for all the people involved, whether or not you launched anything. If you had 4 launches per year, the cost of the fuel was immaterial. It was $1 billion a launch. One of the companies I had co-founded, Space Adventures, would fly people on the Soyuz to orbit. We flew 8 clients to orbit on the Soyuz, and the price at the end was about $50 million a head. But the Soyuz was, on the order of, instead of $1 billion a launch, it was $100 million a launch. If you have a car or a plane or a train, a reusable vehicle, the cost is roughly 3 times the cost of the fuel. And so if you look at what the fuel cost for a Falcon 9 is, the fuel costs, I don't know if you know the number here, people think it's, what percentage of, if a Falcon 9 costs 60, 80, or $80 million to launch, what percentage of that is fuel? And people think maybe it's 90%, 50%. It's less than 1% fuel. The fuel cost is about, call it $300,000 in liquid oxygen and kerosene, RP1. So 3 times the cost of that's $1 million eventually if it was all reusable. And then if you did the calculations for the energy required to get into space, for Sakar, if we were sending you into space along with your spacesuit, the energy is mass times gravity times height, and then to get you to a couple hundred kilometers, and then it's 1/2 mv squared for the kinetic energy, to get you into orbit. And if you do the calculations, and it's a good project for a university or a high school to do it, I would think it's about 1.6 gigajoules of energy. And then if you pull that energy off of the grid at, say, 7 cents per kilowatt hour, the cost of getting you and your spacesuit into orbit was, last time I did this calculation years ago, was about $120. $120. So we have a huge price improvement curve that we're eventually going to get. And I say that only because everything we hold the value on Earth, metals, minerals, energy, real estate, information, is in near infinite quantities in space. And so, yeah, it's the greatest time ever. And I think we as a human species need to back up the biosphere. So One of the things I talk about at XPRIZE is an organization that focuses on the world's biggest problems, because there are very few organizations that do that. And we would love to be working with the UAE and the World Government Summit on this further. So this year, we started last year talking about what are the existential threats for humanity? What are the biggest problems that people are not speaking about? And pandemics was number one on our list. And then we didn't have a time to launch an XPRIZE on it, and then COVID-19 hit. But there are other problems on the list. One of the other problems is asteroid impacts. We don't think about this. We humans are not good at thinking about the world's biggest problems. We think about the local problems, the immediate problems, and so forth. But we are a sitting duck as a planet for asteroids. There are millions, tens of millions of asteroids. And it doesn't take a very big asteroid to enter the Earth's atmosphere over London or Dubai or New York to make COVID-19 look like a sunny day in California. And so people are not focusing on this issue. And so there are existential threats that we do need to be focusing on, and we do need to be, and the space program, that's one of the things. These asteroids are amazing resources and amazing threats, and we need to be really focusing on those more.
Thank you. We have another space question from the UAE. I see these disruptions as the edge of the innovation S-curve that create and boost a new innovation cycle. What is your foresight of technology and outer space investment in the post-COVID-19 era, and how can this accelerate technology singularity and interoperability? What would be the impact of the geopolitical footprint and international relations along the way?
That's a big question. All right. So first of all, what we're seeing, and I'm looking at it through a US lens, so please understand that, is seeing SpaceX backed by Elon and Blue Origin backed by Jeff Bezos as the two dominant space forces coming down the line. I've known Jeff since college. I've known Elon for 20 years now, and both of them are personally committed to making the human race a multiplanetary species. This is way beyond a business for them. This is about, we need to get the human race off the planet. We have to back up the biosphere, that everything we've ever held of value is here, and we can't, it's too big a risk for us not to become a multiplanetary species. And the last time that life moved out of one environment was sort of when the lungfish moved out of the oceans onto land. And now, these next couple of decades is the moment in time where we're moving off the planet to the cosmos. It's a big deal. And so the moon is next, driven either by policy or by, it makes a lot of sense to go set up operations on the moon and then launch from the moon beyond. Elon is prepared to spend 100% of his wealth to get the human race to Mars. Jeff is focused on not Mars, but what are called O'Neill colonies. One of my mentors, Gerard K. O'Neill out of Princeton, spoke about the idea that the best place for the human race to evolve beyond the Earth is not on another planetary surface, not to go back into a gravity well, but instead to create large environments in space. These are large rotating space colonies, miles in diameter, miles in length, and could be, a kilometer or so, mixing metaphors, many kilometers in length and a kilometer in diameter, that are slowly rotating, and you're living on the inside of a rotating cylinder. And these materials come from the lunar surface or come from asteroids to build them. And once we have full-on AI and robotics, these things can be built autonomously by robots, powered by solar or nuclear, lots of materials out there, and creating habitats for the human race that house billions of people. And so, it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. In the near term, we're going to see satellites like Starlink, like Bezos has Kuiper. Apple's been talking about large-scale satellite networks, so is Facebook, and others that will connect 8 billion people and connect 100 trillion sensors on the planet's surface. So again, massive opportunities. I'll give an example of a very cool company that my venture fund, Bold Capital, I'm proud, is invested in. It's called Relativity Space. And they've built the capability there in Los Angeles here, not far from me. They have built the capability to 3D print an entire rocket. So they've built the world's largest 3D printer. It's called Stargate. And they can 3D print a rocket from the ground up, 95% of the entire launch vehicle in 60 days, using Inconel or whatever materials they want. And they've effectively digitized and dematerialized a manufacturing plant. So imagine being able to use Stargate to 3D print a launch vehicle in LA or Detroit or London or Dubai, right? And because it's 3D printed and it requires minimal labor, you can iterate the design rapidly and the costs come down tremendously. And if you're not 3D printing a rocket, you can 3D print a jet engine or an airplane wing. It's amazing capability.
With all this drop in the cost of launches, don't you feel, I mean, obviously the increase in satellites and the increase of objects that we put in space shoot up, but is there no concern about space junk and adding to the stuff up there? Low Earth orbit, you know, is being called the new space. It's more prone to deorbit, burning up in the atmosphere. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. We need to address that. It is the same way we need to address, you know, pollution and litter, CO2 in the atmosphere, plastics in the oceans. You know, one of the things that as we become more abundant as a society, which has its benefits, the other thing is we have to become responsible in these different environments, right? These are all environments, the oceans, our atmosphere, and space. And so one of the areas that I've been thinking about for XPRIZE have been around space junk. How do we deorbit that? How do we extract those, clear this, because space junk is dangerous because it's moving at 17,000 miles per hour, you know, 25,000 kilometers per hour. It's faster than the fastest, you know, speeding bullets, and it's dangerous to satellites and people in orbit. So we do need to. This is where regulations are important, and this is where innovation is important.
Interesting. We have another question from the audience. They're asking, can we build a global database of plasma donors who have recovered from COVID-19? And why would we do that?
So I mean, we could. One of the questions becomes, is the best way to provide a therapeutic for people who have not been infected yet or are actively ill with convalescent plasma, right? The idea is, okay, if I've had the disease, and which I haven't yet, and some people think it's a matter of time, right? Less than 5% of the world's had been infected, and the virus is out there. Can convalescent plasma be a mechanism to treat people, where I donate my blood, the antibodies in the plasma are extracted, and then they're used as a therapeutic or an antiviral by intravenous. That's part of the equation in our armament against this enemy that we have, this singular enemy of COVID-19. I know that there are a number of vaccines under development that are extraordinarily powerful. I know the two vaccines that we've identified in COVAX, that we're building two large vaccine plants in the US, and we have one plant in Taiwan already. We've tested these against live virus in China, and it's very powerful antiviral response. So in the short term, convalescent plasma is important, and yes, we can track it. The challenge becomes people who have been ill. A lot of them, their antibody titers are not very high. This virus is unlike anything we've seen so far, and we're still trying to truly understand it. And some people are super responders and some people are not. So not everybody's plasma antibody levels are the same. And so we really need to make sure there are going to be lots of vaccines coming out of China and the UK and US and around the world. And we're going to, we'll see there are hundreds of vaccine trials going on right now. And so we'll have to see which of these vaccines actually generate the highest antibody titers with the highest neutralizing antibodies. I feel extremely confident about what COVAX has. But at the end of the game, all of these are going to be tested and the best ones will rise to the top.
Interesting. We have a question from Venezuela. How does Dr. Peter Diamandis see the future of tourism and travel after COVID-19 and in the next 10 years?
So hello, Venezuela. Until we have a vaccine that is truly functional, and I hope we'll get there, this may well be just part of the normal viruses out there in the environment, like influenza A and influenza B and others that we just vaccinate for on a regular basis, where the vaccine is updated every year because this virus does mutate. We'll get to a new normal, and I think we'll get a return to tourism in a, hopefully within 2 years, maybe it'll be 3 years. But at the same time, what's also happening is we're going to start to see high resolution VR become part of the equation there, where maybe before I travel to Venezuela or to the UAE, I go and I spend a few hours in VR visiting, because the technology is there to really experience the trip first and make my travel there more meaningful. But ultimately, we're going to have to get to a level of comfort. One of the things we also do not know yet is what is the true mortality rate of this virus. We don't know that. We don't know what the denominator is. We know clearly the number of people who are dying, but we don't know the number of people who have been infected. Is it, 0.5% or 1%? The large number of people who have died, we have to realize that many of those individuals would have probably died from influenza anyway. And so while we might count those deaths towards COVID-19, we're elderly with pre-existing conditions. And so we're still epidemiologists. It will take us the better part of a year to truly understand what the impact, what the mortality rate of COVID-19 was. And then what will we accept? This is not the first pandemic or the last pandemic. And the good news is, again, that we have this massive amount of science and technology that we can use to confront this with. But a lot of this is the psychological safety that people are going to need to get to before they start flying again and traveling again and going back into the office, going back to work. And the fact of the matter is we are at work. We're at work over Zoom, over Facebook, over Microsoft, over a number of platforms. This is work right now. And it's moved all of these things. I wrote about in my book, I can't even see this on Zoom, but yeah. I wrote about these where the world was going to be going in the next 10 years. And all of this stuff is happening. We've moved 3 years in 3 months. It's crazy.
We are getting a lot of questions, but unfortunately, I think I'll need to cut it short due to the time. And I want to ask you, Peter, if there's anything else you would like to leave the audience with before we wrap up.
So I want to leave the audience with a sense of hope, that while this has been incredibly disruptive, it is causing us as a human species to come together in so many ways, that science and engineering and companies are responding rapidly. If we had faced COVID-19 even 20 years ago, we would never have been able to face it and move this rapidly, or be able to save our economies as well as we have. It's really, it's the convergence of exponential technologies, of AI, of CRISPR, of gene therapy, of sensors and networks that are allowing us to respond as we have been. And I have great confidence that we're going to get past this and come out of this stronger than ever before. And I am thankful to my friends in the Emirates and the World Government Summit, and looking forward to the time where I can return for a hug.
You're welcome at any time. Peter, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for your time and your insights. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Over to you, Reem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sagar. It's been such an insightful conversation, from healthcare to space and to so much more. I think we all leave today with the notion of technology has always created opportunity. It's time for us to still keep our positive optimism and keep moving forward. Thank you, Dr. Peter and Sagar. And for everyone tuned in today, we do also have a session tomorrow. You can find the link in the shared with you or on our social media feed. Once again, Sagar, Peter, and the audience for such amazing questions today. Thank you, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.